Now, let's imagine that you can play the game if you live in Kingston. It doesn't matter how old you are, you're allowed to play the game. So there's going to be an additional condition here. So you're allowed to play between 20 and 30. Let's say something like, if you live in Kingston, you can play however old you are. However old you are. Like that. Now I'll just put that on the single line so you can see it. There we go. Now, so let's have a think about this. It's very similar to what we had before. People have to be between 20 and 30 to play the game, but anyone in Kingston is allowed to play. So let's go back to the form. I'm going to actually need to enter some information out. So enter, let's say something like, where do you live, or something like that. Where do you live? And let's just copy and paste in here. And what we're going to have is something called location. Now I'm just going to do it as a text field to keep this simple, this example as simple as I can. You could do this as a drop down box, or you could do it as radio buttons or something like that. There are other ways of getting information, but let's keep it nice and straightforward. So I've got where do you live, and it's going to be called location, and I'll save it and come back to here. If I click refresh now, you can see we've got two fields now. Enter your age and where do you live. So we need to grab that information on the form response page. So copy paste, saves a bit of time. It's going to be called location, and we grab that from the past value which comes through the location in the URL. Now this is the bit where it gets interesting. Basically, we have to think about what does it mean if they live in Kingston. You live in ... Let's just close the paragraph off. Now, of course, it's called location here, so I'm just going to copy that and stick location in there. Always saving as I go along. Now, let's have a think about how we change the if statement for this. If they live in Kingston, they get a free pass. That means they can play, it doesn't matter how old they are. So what we need to do is we need to think about what does that actually mean in terms of this if statement. Well, we definitely need to test to see if they live in Kingston. And we can do this by doing something like this. We can go if location equals Kingston. And of course this is a condition, so it needs to be wrapped up in quotes, like that. Now we need to think about what goes in this gap. Well, if they live in Kingston, that is sufficient for them to play the game. So in other words, if this bit is true, they drop through and they are allowed to play. Alternatively, if this bit is true, they're allowed to play, drop through and play the game. Well, hopefully you've worked out by now, the way we're going to do that is by using an or. So let's have a think about that. If this bit is true, we get a true here, and it doesn't matter what value we have here, they drop through and they are allowed to play. If they don't live in Kingston, in other words, if this bit is false, then it all depends upon what value we get from here. So we need this bit to be true for them to be able to play the game. In other words, they have to be between 20 and 30. Of course, it is entirely possible that they live in Kingston and they are between 20 and 30, in which case we get true or true, which is also true. But that should do it. So let's save and let's try that out. So let's imagine that you are 23, but you do live in Kingston. So you click on OK, and it says you are allowed to play, which is great. So let's go back. Let's imagine that you are 27 and you live in Richmond. OK. You live in Richmond, you are allowed to play, which is great. What about the other alternative then, which is what happens if you're 45 and you live in Kingston? This means they should be allowed to play. You are allowed to play, just like that. So that's a great example of how we're going to combine and an or statements together to make sure that the conditions apply for whatever happens below.